So I will be talking about stress management and relaxation, and most of what I'm going to be focusing on is how to help your children or how to help adolescents deal with it. It's a little bit different than what we would use with adults. Same principles, but you have to change your language and sometimes use a different approach in working with kids. So just kind of an overview, I'm going to go over stress management, including the definition and causes. The effects of stress, both long-term and short-term, general techniques for reducing stress, and then the second part of my presentation is going to be focusing on relaxation techniques. Relaxation techniques actually could be considered a part of stress management. They are typically used more often for kids who have specific anxiety, and we do know that relaxation techniques have been shown in research to reduce anxiety levels. Okay? So the first thing I want to point out is that stress actually can be defined many different ways. A lot of times we refer to it in terms of a stimulus, such as, I have exams, I'm really stressed out. It can also refer to a situation. The situation is very stressful. As a general definition, we look at stress as being a physical, mental, or emotional strain or tension. Stress in and of itself isn't necessarily bad. I think a lot of us automatically assume that stress is negative. Stress is any type of event that promotes change. So you can have positive stress, such as getting married, or getting a new job, or getting a job promotion. Or you can have negative stress, which we often refer to as distress. And that's a lot what we refer to in terms of when we're talking about stress. A lot of people have the idea that having no stress is the goal in our life, and that's not the case. We do need some stress in our life, because otherwise we would just lay on the floor and do nothing and be couch potatoes. We do need some amount of stress to kind of prompt us to do better. Ideally, we have an optimal level of stress. It's kind of a U-curve, as you can see. Too little stress, we're not really motivated to do anything. Too much stress, and we just really can't handle it. And I think it's important to point out that stress is very subjective, particularly for kids. What one child may consider very exciting and awesome and a challenge, another child may be terrified of. So a lot of what we consider stress has to do with how we perceive it. Okay? And actually there was a researcher who did a study on this, and what he basically said is stress stems from how we look at something, how we appraise it. Okay? So if there's a dog coming down the street and I like dogs, then that's not going to be stressful to me. If, however, I have a history of being bitten by dogs, I see one coming down the street, that's going to be very, very stressful. Okay? And a lot of what goes into this too is, do you have the resources to deal with this? Do you know how to problem solve? In terms of sources of stress for kids, it's a little bit different than adults. The Family Management Group actually did a survey of kids 8 to 12 and asked them what their top 10 stressors were. Number 10 was teacher who doesn't like you, not having enough money, marriage or remarriage of a parent, moving to a new school, birth of brother or sister, that can be kind of stressful, lack of privacy, attractiveness, particularly among adolescents, that's a big one, what they look like, taking a test, which is something that every child encounters when they go to school, fighting with a friend or sibling, and the number one source of stress for kids is whenever their parents are having a problem. Kids pick up on some of that anxiety and really worry about mom and dad. One of the things that's also stressful for children that's not on this list is noise. As adults, we have an ability to kind of tune out the sound of the traffic or the railroad train. Kids haven't really learned how to do that, so when they have a lot of excess noise in the environment going on, that can be pretty stressful for them. So what causes stress? Stress is actually a physical process, and like I said earlier, it does involve how we look at things. But basically, our brain has two reactions to stress, and one of them is known as the fight or flight mechanism, and that's controlled by the sympathetic nervous system, which is the side that has the cat with the funky mohawk. This actually was very adaptive when we were first evolving as cavemen. Basically what this does is it prepares our body to either fight a danger or to get the heck out of there. Because whenever you're facing a danger, you don't want to be in the situation where you're just sitting here, well, what should I do? You know, if a bear is coming at you, you want to get out of there. Okay. So the sympathetic nervous system, whenever you encounter a danger, it's automatically activated. And what happens is your heart starts beating faster. You start breathing much more rapidly. All of the blood is sent to your muscles so that you can run and get out of there. A lot of blood sugar is released so that you have the energy to get out of there. The opposite system is the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's usually what's involved when we're in a relaxation state. So our body is always kind of in this state or balance between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. Okay? So with the parasympathetic nervous system, we actually see the opposite. Heart rate decreases, breathing slows down, blood is dispersed pretty much throughout the body. It's not just shunted to the muscles. In terms of the effects of stress, what has happened over the years is that we still have this fight or flight response to dangers, but it's no longer adaptive. So for instance, if you have a child who's very anxious about mom or dad going away or mom or dad dropping them off at school, it's not very adaptive for them to have the increased heart rate, the increased breathing, because they're not really trying to flee the situation. Short term, we know that the effects of stress can result in sore muscles. For kids, it's often manifest as body pains, such as headaches or tummy aches. It could lead to fatigue or irritability. One of the things that you often see with anxious kids is that they have a lot of trouble in school. They can't focus. They have trouble concentrating. If stress continues for a long period of time, then what we see is that you're at an increased risk for developing colds and flus, because stress does have an effect upon your immune system. Can affect your memory long term. For children who have chronic medical problems or who have medical issues, it can actually result in increased pain. Of course, depression and anxiety, those are things that we commonly see. And then the stress-related disorders, those are things like irritable bowel syndrome, chronic headaches. In adults, it's more like hypertension. So stress does have both short-term and long-term effects. The question I get asked most often is, yeah, stress exists, so what do I do about it? How do I reduce stress? Well, I think that there's a number of strategies you can use. The first one is to be able to identify the source. If you don't know what it is that's causing you stress, then it's very difficult to problem solve and come up with a solution. Another thing that we're typically not great about doing is planning for relaxation. Okay. And then changing the way we talk to ourselves. So in terms of identifying source, one of the biggest ones that both children and adults mention is time. We oftentimes are in a rush. We're trying to do many different things at once. That constant sense of being hurried, not having enough time, trying to squeeze everything into one day leads to high levels of stress. For expectations, a lot of that is what children think that they should be. So for instance, a child may have the expectation that I'm always supposed to get straight A's, or if I'm not invited to every birthday party, then I'm not nice enough to friends. Okay? And what happens is that they compare themselves to this high-level expectation and then they don't meet up. So they become very anxious about that. Okay. Role overload. You're seeing that more and more among adolescents, and that's just the kind of notion of you can't be at two places at one time. You can't be at soccer practice and be at on debate team and be on brain bowl all at the same time. You can only be at one place at one time, and whenever you have these conflicting roles, then it causes stress. Okay. And then last, of course, is resources. That tends to be one that's more prominent among adolescents. Resources include things like finances. Do I have the money to solve my problems? It includes things like emotions. For younger kids, it's very difficult for them to be able to identify their emotions. They don't have the vocabulary quite yet, so they feel really yucky inside, but they're not really able to draw upon that and identify what it is that's going on with them. A big one for teenagers is social support. Does the child have somebody he or she can talk to? And when I say that, I don't just mean like quantity, because there's a lot of kids who have a lot of friends, but they're not necessarily very close to them and they can't have a intimate conversation with them. So social support tends to be very important. The second step in stress management is being able to identify the problem. And this includes not only identifying the problem, but coming up with different solutions. Being able to determine what it is that you want to work. Okay? So with kids, we usually refer to this as kind of detective thinking, because it helps them get in that mindset that there are specific things that they want. And if parents go through the problem-solving strategy with them, that's usually pretty helpful. So most children, if they have a problem, usually will be able to identify at least one solution. Role as a parent is to help them come up with different solutions, because oftentimes the first solution a child comes up with is either not going to solve the problem or it's not realistic. You know, like if Johnny doesn't like his teacher, well, I'll just move to another school. That's a solution, but it's certainly not very adaptive and not likely to happen. Okay. And then you also have to determine which solution is best. Now the biggest one for adults and kids, like I said, is planning time for relaxation. You need to have time in your schedule, roughly at least 10 minutes a day, to have some sort of relaxing activity. And it doesn't have to be something like meditation or anything that's specifically labeled as relaxation. It just needs to be something that the child has to unwind. It can be listening to music. It can be hanging out with friends, talking to pets. Exercising is also a good one. And then the last thing you need to do in terms of self-talk is you need to change the way that we speak to ourselves. Because a lot of us have a tendency to be very negative towards ourselves. We are very kind to others, but when we're trying to do something, it's, oh, I didn't get it, so I must be really stupid, or, I'm really bad at this, I'm never going to get it. And kids pick up on this, and they'll start to model it. So it's very important for parents to be cognizant of the way that they're talking to themselves and to model appropriate behavior. So instead of saying, oh, wow, I ruined Daddy's lawnmower, you might say something like, wow, I'm really proud of myself for trying to mow the lawn, or I'm really proud of myself for trying to cook a meal, even if it turns out bad. The focus is on the effort and not necessarily the outcome. Okay? As a general rule, you can think of this as trying to say things to yourself that you would say to a friend. Okay? So you would never tell a friend, oh, you're an idiot, you're going to lose it. Most of us wouldn't say that. Oh, this is really going to hurt, or you're not going to be able to stand this, it's going to be awful. Instead, we tend to be more encouraging. You can handle this, it's going to be okay. It's going to hurt, but it's going to be over with quick. You can do this. Okay. And I think a lot of times when I tell parents this, they may misunderstand what I'm saying, because they think that perhaps I'm saying that you should be overly optimistic and be like, oh, well, everything is great and your child's failing every class. It's not necessary to be kind of like a Pollyanna and be unrealistically positive. You can be realistic, but if your child is, truly failing all their classes, then, don't lie and say, wow, you're excellent students. In terms of time management techniques, this used to be something that was pretty much limited to adults. Again, because we're having adolescents that are becoming more and more active, as well as children, it's becoming more important for parents to be able to manage their child's time. So I think the first step is being able to prioritize what is most important to my child. Does my child want to play soccer more than he does basketball? Which is more important? Organization is a big one, especially with young kids who don't necessarily have the organization skills. Being organized for your child, modeling those kind of things is a good idea. Schedules are great. Kids really thrive on routines. So if you have a set routine for things happening, that's usually very reassuring to them. And I don't mean that everything has to happen like at 7:52 a.m. every day. General time of day, get up at 7:30, go to school at 8, those kind of things. And then the last thing for time management is just be reasonable. A lot of us have a tendency to try and squeeze way more into our day than is really possible, because we think that we can get from Dartmouth to Halifax in 5 minutes, and we don't take into account that if you're driving at 5 o'clock in the evening, there's going to be traffic. So you need to plan for those kind of things and be realistic in terms of how much time you do have. Nutrition is a big one. Nutrition for kids, the busier they get, typically the worse their nutrition gets. And I think that's probably true with adults as well, because we get busy and we don't have time to go to the grocery store. We don't have time to cook a decent meal. So instead, we're more inclined to stop by McDonald's and get a Happy Meal or something like that. So it's important to have general good nutrition. I don't think going to McDonald's once in a while is a bad thing. For kids, it's pretty important to limit their caffeine. And there are a lot of pops out there that have a lot of caffeine that most people aren't aware of. So things like Mountain Dew, usually any of the dark colas, those are things that you probably should not be giving to your child after probably 2 or 3 in the afternoon, because it's likely to make them stay up. Okay. Have healthy snacks and breakfast every day. Breakfast goes a long way towards helping children be able to learn in school. And then the last one is sleep. And I think this is probably one of the difficult ones, because we all say that, we agree that a child should have a set bedtime and we're going to have the schedule, but when it comes down to it, and you're getting home late from work and then you have to cook dinner, and it becomes more difficult to actually adhere to that type of schedule. But as much as possible, if you can have a set bedtime and have a bed routine, that helps a lot. Using quiet activities, such as reading or listening to music. The big one that the American Pediatric Association has really been emphasizing lately is to avoid having any type of TV or screen in the child's room. And again, that's one of those things that sounds great in theory, but when it comes down to being practical, it's very difficult. Some children actually go to sleep by the TV. And what we've learned from research is that children who have TVs in their rooms get, on average, 1 hour less of sleep every night. So having a TV in the family room or someplace other than the child's room is a good idea. Relaxation. I felt like this definitely represented what some of us feel like doing sometimes. It's not a strategy I'd recommend for your kids, but I'm sure you can identify that sometimes you just feel so frustrated that you want to bang your head on the table. So there are actually 7 different techniques, 7 specific relaxation techniques that we recommend for kids. The first one is breathing. And when I say that, people kind of look at me funny because they're like, well, most people breathe anyway. What are you talking about? Well, it's important how you breathe. Because again, what happens is the more stress we get, the more we start to breathe very shallow. Kids generally are pretty good about breathing through their stomach as opposed to their chest. And that's usually indicative of more relaxation. One of the ways you can tell if you're breathing too rapidly or if you're breathing in a very stressed manner is you can put one hand on your chest and one hand on your abdomen and take a deep breath. And if the hand on your chest is moving more than the hand on your abdomen, you're probably taking too shallow of breaths. Okay. For kids, we try and do this in a very graphic way. We try and teach them how to imagine that they have like a balloon in their belly, and they're going to take a deep breath and inflate the balloon and then they're going to let it out. I think one of the difficult things for most people is actually letting the breath out, because we do have a tendency to hold our breath. We can take a deep breath in, but then we never let it out. And it's also important that you let it out slowly. So for kids, what I usually like to do is I like to say, pretend that you're a tire and the air is leaking slowly out. So they do that slowly. Another strategy that works well with kids is bubbles. Kids love bubbles. Parents don't necessarily love them as much because they tend to be kind of messy. But the very act of the child holding the bubble blower up to their face and blowing encourages them to have deep breaths. One of the other techniques that we do is pinwheels. Again, if the child holds it up and blows it, that encourages them to breathe slowly. And I want to caution that whenever you notice that you're starting to feel stressed, or you notice that your child is breathing very rapidly, probably should have them do 1 or 2 deep breaths, but don't do it for a long time, because if you keep doing these really deep breaths, you're going to get dizzy and possibly pass out, which would not be good. One for older kids is meditation. And I think a lot of us have this image of meditation as being this very formal type activity. But in fact, meditation doesn't have to be that way. Meditation can be basically focusing on your breathing. It can be focusing on saying a word over and over again. Or it can just be basically letting your mind kind of wander. The important thing to remember with meditation is that it's something that you'll need to be in a quiet room to do. So if your child is at home and they have lots of siblings, then it's kind of difficult for them to be meditating. So you want to be able to have them in a position where they have quiet and they can relax. And meditation is one of those activities that we know that the more you practice, the better you get. So likely the first time you or your child tries meditation, you're probably not going to notice the effects as much as if you've been practicing it for a couple of weeks. A strategy that works really well with little kids is visualization or mental imagery. Kids are very good at imagining things, and as we get older, that ability tends to decrease. So having a child close his or her eyes and envision some place that they like, whether it be like a fairy tale castle or their favorite place to eat, having them focus on those kind of things and integrating all of the senses is usually very important. And when I say multiple senses, what I'm referring to is, ask the child what they're seeing. Ask the child if they hear anything. Do they taste anything? Okay. Use as many details as possible, because the more details you use, the more likely it is that the child is going to be able to get involved in that and become distracted from the stress. Okay. This also tends to be very good for teens. If you have a child who's very good at visualizing things, this can be effective. The next strategy is muscle relaxation. And there's several different strategies. One of the formal strategies we use is what's known as progressive muscle relaxation. And this is actually a series of going through and tensing and releasing your muscles. And the reason we do this is because a lot of times when people get stressed, they start to tense up their muscles and they don't even notice. So they come home at the end of the day and it's like, oh, my neck hurts or my head hurts or parts of their body hurt, and they don't know why. For progressive muscle relaxation, if you learn what your muscle feels like when it's all tensed up, then you can start to identify when you're doing that and relax your muscles. This is a strategy that I find kids really, really like. Use a lot of visual images. As an example, one of the things I would tell them to do is to imagine that they have a big ball of clay in their hands. And I want them to squeeze it as tight as they can and then kind of release it. Okay? Or I might tell them that I want them to imagine that they're eating a lemon and they have to pucker up their face because it's really sour. Okay? And then you relax it. So having those visual images is very helpful for kids because, if you say tense your shoulders, they may not really be able to do that on command. So One of the easiest things that we can do for our kids is just touch. There have been a lot of studies on the effects of massage therapy, both formal and informal massage. Formal massage, they've actually shown that it can increase blood circulation, decrease muscle tension. In low-weight babies, it actually helps them grow at a much quicker rate. For informal massage, what we found is that in terms of procedures, just having a parent next to the child, touching their back or rubbing their back is very comforting. Okay? Even the act of rocking your child can be very helpful. It's very therapeutic. Then the last thing, of course, is holding. You can never give too many hugs. I think particularly for a child who's feeling very anxious, having their mom or dad hold them close can be very soothing. And as an interesting study, they actually, there was a researcher at the University of North Carolina who looked at blood pressure and subjective stress levels in adults after one of 3 activities. They were couples, and they either watched 5 minutes of a romantic film, they either did that or spent 20 seconds hugging, or the other one was they spent 5 minutes discussing something personal. And what they found was that those couples who hugged for 20 seconds were the ones who showed the most reductions in stress and blood pressure. And I don't know what movies they were watching, so that may have affected it. Exercise. Exercise is very, very important, particularly for kids. What exercise does is it kind of resets our baseline. So if we go through a day and we're really stressed out and our stress level is kind of here, then when we exercise, it actually releases endorphins, and so your stress level actually goes back down after you're done with exercise. Okay? It's great for letting off tension. It helps us sleep a lot better. For a lot of kids, it can help them kind of squeeze out excessive tension in their muscles. And it doesn't have to be something formal, like you don't have to take your kid to the Y. It can be something like taking a walk or just going on a bike ride with your kid. And then the last strategy is music. And again, this is something that we've seen more with teenagers than we have seen with little kids. What we know is that kids who listen to a certain music, the tempo of the music affects whether or not they become more energetic or more relaxed. Okay? And I say that with a little bit of caution because sometimes teenagers like to listen to Limp Bizkit or whatever's popular that's not necessarily really soothing and relaxing in our view. I wouldn't say, ban them from listening to that, because music can also be a really good distraction, and it's therapeutic in that way. In terms of breathing and reducing anxiety, most of the studies that have been done have used music that has a very slow tempo, like classical music or easy listening type music. Okay. Music has been shown to reduce pain in kids, and again, that's probably because of the distraction principle. When children are focusing on how much pain they're having or how bad something is, it tends to intensify their feelings. And when they're focusing on something else, then they don't notice the pain as much. In terms of summary, we know that the sources of stress for kids is much different than it is for adults. And kids can be taught to manage stress fairly easily. A lot of it has to be structured by the parents. They have to do the modeling, show the child what it looks like. As a general rule of thumb, for most kids, if you incorporate time management techniques, a healthy diet, and sufficient sleep, that's usually enough to manage average levels of stress. If your child is still having anxiety above and beyond that, then I would probably recommend that you try one of the specific relaxation techniques. There's a lot of really good books out there. I did want to show you some of those. The Healing Images for Children, which is this book I have here, is really good. It has a lot of different stories and scripts in it that you can go over with your child. It has a lot of different activities and advice for explaining things to your child. For parents, also the repeat books, Helping Your Anxious Child, those tend to be very good because I think that there's some things that as parents we do that we think is helpful, but research actually shows that it may increase a child's anxiety. So that's very helpful in terms of monitoring your parenting behavior so that your child doesn't increase their stress level.